Okay, to be honest, we had a completely different show set up for you today, but then we got this report from Common Sense Media. It just came out this week with a study on what our kids are doing on their phones, which apps are taking up most of their time, how much time they're taking up, and I had to share these findings with all of you. It's happening right now on Momcast. Welcome to Momcast. I'm your host, Emma Jade. This new report, released by Common Sense Media, they tracked 200 kids between the ages of 11 and 17 to see what they're really doing on their phones. Are you ready for some of these numbers? 97%, we're talking almost 100%, use them during school hours. 60%, so more than half, use them between the hours of midnight and 5 a.m. Some of these kids in this study receiving more than 4,500 notifications a day. We know, we have the science that shows phone use and social media is not good for our kids. It's not good for us, but according to this study, kids are still using them more than ever. So I've got everything you need to know from this new report, as well as steps that we can start taking today to start changing the relationship that our kids, and honestly, quite frankly, the relationship that we have with our smartphones too. We also have response from the social media companies on how they're trying to help out. It's not much, but like I said, we're all in this together. First though, let's catch you up on the news. So you have probably been hearing a lot about the government shutdown. Now, this is a very fluid situation, so you have to stick with 12news.com for the latest on what exactly is going on. But there are a lot of common questions that people have been asking about how this is going to actually affect them. So first off, let's tackle Social Security and Medicare. Those programs will remain funded and continue uninterrupted if and when the government shuts down. Travel plans, that's a little bit different. You might have some longer wait times at airports because air traffic controllers and TSA agents will be working without pay. National parks is another one. They could be impacted right away, but it's all up to the Biden administration on whether or not they will close some of them. SNAP and WIC benefits is another biggie. SNAP benefits, those are going to continue all the way through October. But the 7 million moms and kids relying on WIC benefits, that's in danger. The funding there could dry up within a matter of days. But it does depend on which state you live in, because some states have some extra funding that could help out for another week or two. It really just depends. Again, for the latest on the government shutdown, you got to stay with 12 News. They'll have all the information that you need to try and figure out what's best for you and your family. I have another new poll to share with you. More Americans are leaning towards Trump in 2024. This is a poll that was done by ABC News and the Washington Post. It shows that in a head-to-head 2024 matchup, 51% of the U.S. would vote for former President Trump, while only 42% would vote to re-elect President Biden. This comes as President Biden's approval rating on things like the economy and immigration are on the decline. I can't believe this. I don't know if you can either. We're already headed into October. It is time to start thinking about holiday travel. And this is a good time to start thinking about it because according to the experts, the best time to book our holiday airfare is right now, today, and the second week of October. During that time, economists say prices are the lowest and there are lots of seats left to book. You will start to see prices rise right after that October 14th. Travelers are seeing cheaper flights this year, which is some good news. For Thanksgiving, we're down about 14% compared to last year. And then for Christmas travel, we're down about 12% on round trip tickets. That's according to Hopper. So typically on Momcast, this is a time where I would head over to the other side of the studio and get to our interview segment. But because we had to change things up today, we really want to focus in on this new report from Common Sense Media that was just released this week. I'm going to take you over to the desk here. So I took the findings and I wanted to hear from you directly from what's happening in your home, what you're seeing with your kid and their phone use. So Common Sense Media tracked the Android phones of 200 kids between the ages of 11 to 17. The study found 97% use their phones during school hours. When I asked you the same question on our Momcast Instagram page, 72% of you said that your kids use their phone during school hours. The study also found 60%, so more than half of kids use their phones overnight. It's between the hours of midnight and 5 a.m. Results were definitely different here, which I thought was pretty interesting. In our Momcast crowd, you said only 9% use them during those hours, or at least that we're aware of, because hopefully you're sleeping. Another big takeaway from this study was the amount of notifications that these kids are getting every single day. Half the kids got 237 notifications or more, some receiving more than 4,500 notifications a day. The study found apps like Snapchat and Discord sent the most notifications. Those are more like messaging apps. According to your responses, though, Snapchat is the app that your kids use the most. And what's interesting is that these apps claim they are helping limit your kids' screen time. TikTok says they have a 60-minute daily screen time limit on teen accounts, so anyone under 18. But teens can just enter a passcode to bypass that limit. Discord and Snapchat, they both say that they are trying to look at new ways to adjust the amount of notifications that your kid receives on their phones. That's also something that you can change on their phones. You can completely take notifications away from certain apps. And then let's talk about Meta. They own Instagram and Facebook. They're going to send a take a break message on the app after a certain amount of time passes for those teen accounts. This report did find that teens are also trying to set limits for themselves, that the kids that they were talking to realized, yeah, I'm on my phone a lot. So they wanted to set some limits too, but it didn't always work out. I brought in our trusted child and family therapist. You know her. She's been on Momcast every single week, Amy Anger. She's known as The Real Parent on Instagram. I wanted her take on these findings and what we can do as parents. We want to feel empowered here. We want to feel like there is actionable things that we can do today to help and change what we're finding in these reports. So check out some ways to improve the relationship that your kids have with their phones.
Biggest takeaway, I think, is that as parents and as kids, I think we grossly underestimate how much time we're spending on phones. And seeing a number amount and seeing when we're using the phones, to me, raises a flag of, wow, how much of our lives is this eating into, and how much of our children's lives is it affecting? And it's big.
I shared your rule in your house that you guys wait until 14 to get a smartphone.
Because I did so much training in child mental health before I even had kids, I had images of my own kids' use of screen time and then phones, and I saw the way it was affecting kids and relationships within their family in my private practice when my kids were really little. I also have never heard of anybody saying, I wish I'd given my child a phone earlier. And people who, even when they've waited, are like, oh, I wish we could have waited longer, right? It opens up this whole element of something you have to manage, and it's complicated. And our kids are always 4 steps ahead of us in what they know how to do and access versus what we do. I would say one of our biggest wins as a family, and for me, what really highlighted the benefit of this was when we hit COVID in 2020 and went into shutdown, which at the time they said 2-week shutdown. Mm-hmm. We sat our kids down. Our oldest at the time was 13 years old, so he did not have a phone. We sat all of our kids down and said, hey guys, we think we're in it for the long haul. And we're going to have a lot of time home, and we're going to have a lot of time on our hands. And there are good ways we can use our time, and better ways and best ways that we can use our time. So be thinking about how you want to use this time that we have. And our oldest son came to us and he said, hey, Mom and Dad, I really want to learn to play bass guitar. And we were like, fantastic. And he spent all this downtime teaching himself guitar and getting into it. He then added electric guitar. He now plays acoustic guitar. And I know for a fact that if he had had a phone during COVID, he wouldn't have had the need to fill his time. So because we set that standard with our first, and they saw it was 14, it was in fact 14 years old. Then our second, she asked, she pushed, she begged, but why? But what about this? What about a Gab? What about a watch phone? All the other things. And our kids have just seen us say, no, like 14 is it. You're totally fine. And so they don't even ask anymore. It makes it so that it's not a conflict in our house because the standard has been set. They've seen the boundary kept, and they know you can ask and ask and ask, but it's not going to change. And it has just helped foster that connection and kept our kids off until a little bit later.
Why do parents need to be worried about what's coming out in this report? What are some of the negative effects of having our kids be on their phones, be disconnected? be this distracted? What are some things that you have seen that have come from excessive phone use?
Sure. So one of the things I think is sometimes we get caught up in the number of, like in this study, they said median use was like 4.5 hours. They had some who were trending upwards of 16 hours and some who were only on their phones for a few minutes. And I think sometimes we as parents can get caught up in like the number and the time and the apps that they're on, right? We're looking closely, and the highest apps that they're on is social media, YouTube, and gaming. Time and time again, and again in that study, when they're tracking the time, those are the three. And I think it's easy for parents to go, oh, you know what, but part of that time they're doing this, and we justify the time that they are spending on their phones with, but part of that time is spent doing productive things. I think that we are missing the bigger picture, which is when they are on their phones, there simply are other things they are not doing. They are not connecting in person with people. They are not getting up and physically moving their bodies. They are not using their time creatively. They're not learning how to sit with boredom and learning how to regulate themselves. And what we often see with kids is after they've spent a stretch of time on their phones, they get off their phones, they're moody, they're irritable, they're short in their responses, maybe they're impulsive. We are not giving them the chance to learn self-regulation. And these phones are almost acting for tweens and teens like a pacifier acts for a baby. And it makes it easier when they're on their phone. They're not hounding you. They're not complaining of being bored. They're not making messes. But those are the things we want them to be doing. And one of the largest, most glaring things that these kids aren't doing when they're on their phones is also sleeping. So, when we're talking overnight phone use, so if we're looking at physical activity, connecting in person, self-regulating, and sleeping, those are the pillars of solid mental health, not just for kids, but for adults too. So we are just degrading those characteristics that help raise strong, resilient kids because they are on their phones. So it's not just my kid's doing great things on their phone. They're learning to code. They're learning another language. Fantastic. Set a boundary, because you just simply can't do other better for you things when you are stuck on your phone scrolling.
The Today Show covered this pretty extensively yesterday. I saw that you put that out on your social media as well. And Savannah Guthrie at the end said something that really has stuck with me, and I would love your reaction to it. She said that I'm afraid that, we're going to get later in life and we're going to realize that handing our kids a phone was like handing them a pack of cigarettes.
Yes.
What's your reaction to that?
I absolutely agree. I think that we are creating a new reality for our kids because things are being normalized for them because they are so commonplace. You've had the experience of going into a restaurant and you look over and you see a group of teens together and they are all together in the same space and they are all staring at their phones. We are raising kids who don't know how to connect in person because the phone becomes the crutch. And we're seeing it in young adults right now. We're definitely seeing it in teens. Our rates of anxiety and depression are higher than they've ever been. And we are raising people who look connected on the surface, right? I have this many followers. I have this long of a streak on Snapchat, whatever it is. They look connected on paper, but they are feeling disconnected. And in a lot of ways, we're treating these kids, this is like the guinea pig generation of, I've had a smartphone since I was this age, and we still haven't seen the full effect of that. But I'm with Savannah. It's not good, and it is not in our kids' best interest.
Are we too far behind now? Like, how do we rein this in? How do we keep up with the studies and the things that are coming out? But also the culture now is to have a phone for these kids.
The culture now is to have a phone.
Yes.
I think there's a couple of things. I think you as the parent have to realize the bigger picture of why you set the standards around a phone that you do, because your kids are naturally going to want it. They are going to be in the minority the longer you wait, and that's okay. We as parents have to learn to sit with that. The other thing, because I get this question a ton on my Instagram, especially when I posted that we wait until 14, and people are like losing their minds. Well, what? But your kids must be left out. How? No, my kids are not left out. I have very connected kids who feel very much a part of things. And that's because I basically view my phone as our family landline. So if my 12-year-old is like, Mom, everybody's on this group chat and I'm not on it, give them my phone number. He gets the group chats. My phone becomes the landline, and he can still be connected that way. So I think that we miss the point when we say, in order for them to be connected on a text, on a group chat, whatever it is, it has to be on their phone. I don't agree with that. Parents, it is our job. Our kids need us to set the boundaries, because these phones and these apps are made to keep you scrolling. And even for adults, it's hard. We've got developing brains that are like only halfway towards full development. How do we expect them to put any limit around that? It's like putting a plate of cookies on a table and leaving your kid in the room with it for hours on end and thinking, well, they know they won't feel good if they eat more than like 2 or 3 cookies. They'll stop themselves. They won't stop themselves. They need us to help set the norm by setting time restrictions, by setting content restrictions, by making sure these phones do not go in their bedrooms overnight for sleep. They need us to set the parameters around it so that they can kind of start to learn and sense how it feels, so that they can step away from it as they get older when these restrictions are no longer there. But we have got to help guide them.
If I am a parent who's watching this and I, want to start a conversation with my kid, where do I start? What should I say today?
I think if we're assuming that the child is already on the phone, I think a great place to start is by sitting with your child and having them open up. I trend to iPhones. I know iPhones, so I don't know what it is on other phones, but sit down and start with looking at total screen time and look through those things. I also like to ask, because I have a lot of kids. I had one child who I was meeting with who needed like an emergency session. They had had a panic attack at school. Their mom was really worried, got him in for a session. And this child described to me having a panic attack, feeling completely unprepared for a class presentation and an exam that was happening that day. And it was like, I've just been so busy, and if only I'd had this much more time. And so I said, I want you to do me a favor, and I want you to open your screen time on your phone, and I want you to look. And this child did this, and their jaw dropped, because they had spent 18 hours on their phone that week. And what they were thinking was, if I'd had 2 more hours to prepare, I would have been ready, right? So I think if you sit down with your child and look at screen time report and ask your child beforehand, how much time, before we look at this, how much time do you think you're spending on your phone a day and a week? And start there and look and see, how closely matched are we in terms of what we think we're spending and what we're actually spending? And then also talk through the stress they're feeling over the week, how they're using their time. If they feel like they're giving the sort of time to the goals that they say they have, right? I want to get really good at this. I want to improve at this. I want these grades. Are you giving time to those goals in the way that you should be, considering that's your goal? Or is your phone getting in the way of it? And how can you support yourself and helping kids, kind of almost hand holding them to things like not having my phone with me when I do homework, putting my phone away when I go to friend's house, turning off notifications. Because if you're getting 230 notifications, if everything's an emergency, nothing's an emergency. You do not need those banners constantly coming up. And helping put some of the onus on the kids, and then also letting the kids know, I'm realizing that I let this get a little out of hand, and I want to support you in having a good relationship with technology. So here are the things I'm going to do. And, screen time passwords, content restrictions, those sorts of things. Your child is going to end up with a phone, and they need to learn how to navigate it. But setting up really just consistent and predictable boundaries around it. So, putting it away during homework time, not bringing it to the table even for dinner, because we know from research that even having your phone in your pocket in do not disturb, you still behave differently and are distracted differently than if it is fully not there. So setting them up to start having them develop the habits that will set them up to have a successful relationship, because the goal really is help your child learn how to be intentional and aware of their phone use so that they can use the phone to their benefit and not become controlled by the phone. And if you sit back and do nothing, your phone will take over. It will creep in. It will become the thing. If you are not aware and intentional about it, it will become the thing that takes over, and it will use up more of your time than you want it to. But teaching kids how to be in control of that and to be intentional about it is a gift that I think we as parents need to give our kids, because this is their world. This reality is not going away.
Can you give me like a few examples? You talked about not having it at the dinner table and not even having it in your phone at the dinner table. What are some other ones that I could enact today?
Putting it away during homework time, like having it completely turned off, put away during homework time, because we know that homework takes this much longer when you're stopping and looking at your phone. And phones are such a tool for escapism, right? I feel bored, I feel stressed, I feel overwhelmed. I don't want to feel this way. Scroll on my phone. And really, homework that should have taken this long suddenly has taken this long. So I would say that. In our family, we have also adopted a no phone on Sunday rule, which I love. The phones are completely off and put away, and it just allows us to connect and engage and reset differently, because I do believe that in terms of the stimulation that comes from a phone, visually and mentally for our kids, they really do need kind of a reset. So I think the hard stop on picking a period of time, or hey, if we're going out for dinner or family activity, the phones don't come. We have also enacted, much to the dismay of my kids that have phones, no phones on family vacations. And our kids interact differently with each other when there is not a phone there as an option, right? A phone is the lazy out, and it's easy, and we all enjoy kind of like just some good downtime on our phone. But for me as a parent, my husband and I have just decided there are times when phones are just not part of the equation at all, right? So dinner, homework, we've picked Sundays for us that are like phones are completely gone. Finding the times that work for your family to really set your family up for connection, because connection is what is going to foster healthy emotional wellness in our kids, and phones are getting in the way of that. So just setting some parameters around that. And it doesn't have to be completely restrictive and prohibitive, but just a known, like, hey, this is the standard in our family. We all just do it. And it just becomes the norm. It's when our kids kick back and we give in that it's hard to establish that norm, but realizing it's okay if your kids don't like the boundary you're putting around it, you can still put that boundary around it.
Oh, I love her advice, because it just makes me feel like we're not too far behind. On our Momcast Instagram page, you had some great advice. You chimed in, you gave such good tips on what's working in your home and how you're trying to rein in the time that your kids are spending on their smartphones. A lot of you responded with no phones in the bedrooms. I think I saw that response the most. Lee had their teen write their own contract about phone usage and consequences. That was awesome. Jenny has a central location that all phones are plugged into every night, she says, from 9 p.m. to 7 a.m. Some of you are choosing to just use those Gab phones, so no social media at all. Jade has a really good tip too. She has her teen take a week-long break every once in a while to try and break habits of grabbing it mindlessly. I try and do this with myself too. Some of these tips, we say that they're just for our kids or for our teens, but I think that we need to do them as well. You know that feeling. You know that feeling that it's just so much better when we're away from our phone and when we're really connecting. That's all we're trying to do here, just more often. We're going to continue this conversation. There are so many great organizations and people right here in Arizona who are working with these companies, these big tech companies, to try and develop healthier options for our kids and, frankly, for us and for smartphones. The conversation doesn't end here. Stick with Momcast throughout the week. Follow me at Emma Jade TV on Instagram. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next week right here on Momcast.